Hello everyone, this is I Sleep Too Late, and in this video I'd like to present Avatar: The Last Airbender in the context of Vintage. As you may or may not know, Vintage is an eternal format in Magic the Gathering that consists of a large pool of pretty much almost every card in Magic the Gathering, and Avatar is set to be released very soon, and it may have lasting impacts on formats such as Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. This is an illustration from Avatar's Wrath, which is a card that is going to be coming out, and the artist is Ainezu. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. So, what is the purpose of this video? I want to answer and address the question, what can we say about Vintage right now, in the future, and how is the format going to change based on the set Avatar: The Last Airbender? I'm going to discuss what we missed from Spider-Man, the current state of Vintage, some of the effects of the ban list announcement in context of other formats, and then I'm going to move on to kind of what makes a card good or bad, what are some possible playables, and what can we realistically expect from this set. Now, as you may or may not know, I do upload videos every day. The videos I've been uploading with regards to Magic have been almost every 48 hours, with the overlapping days being, Pokemon videos, where on the days that I don't upload Magic the Gathering videos. However, some of these videos are pertaining to Vintage, specifically Vintage Magic the Gathering online leagues, and some of these videos have been uploaded way in advance into the future. So the videos that you might be seeing over the next few weeks are actually videos that I've uploaded from way back in, I want to say September. And this was way before even Spider-Man was released. And Spider-Man was a set that had some effects or impacts on various formats, such as Modern, even Standard, especially Standard actually, because it is a standard legal set. But what I will say is that I'd like to talk about, how Spider-Man has affected Vintage, if at all. And so with that said, I will let you know that I do plan on playing more Vintage in the future. I will be uploading future videos pertaining to Magic the Gathering online leagues in Vintage, with Avatar: The Last Airbender being legal in the format. So as far as Spider-Man goes, things that we missed, things that I didn't really record, things that I didn't really emphasize in my channel has been, what are some of the cards from Spider-Man that have seen play in Vintage? What are some of the things that we missed? So it's important to understand that Vintage is an eternal format, and what that means is that in addition to cards from eternal sets being legal, not a lot is going to really change in the setting of Vintage. A lot of the cards, such as Black Lotus, Moxen, Force of Will, they're still going to be seeing a lot of play. And they're not going to be really budging in the sense that, the cards that you're going to see, the decks you're going to see, Mud, Shops, Dredge, Vine, Mono White Initiative. These are all cards, archetypes, decks that are going to continue to see play in Vintage, almost regardless of what new sets come out. I mean, Mono White Initiative is probably one of the few exceptions where it really came out and emerged as an archetype after the introduction of, going on adventures, taking the initiative, right? Mono White Initiative, so to speak. So there are some examples of sets or decks that have released or emerged new ideas for Vintage. But for the most part, over the last 2 to 3 years, I want to say not much has really changed in this format. And as far as Spider-Man goes, there have been 0 cards that have shown up in the top 8 of the last Eternal Weekend. And any real card that you might have thought was seeing play, such as Spider-Woman, Stunning Savior, which you see on the left, these cards may have made some appearances in leagues in Magic the Gathering Online early on in the season, but haven't really progressed into maintaining their presence in the main deck or even the sideboard of some of these decks. So today is November 12th, 2025. The set Avatar: The Last Airbender is scheduled to be released on November 21st, 2025, almost, I think, globally for Paper Magic. The set on Magic Arena is set to be released roughly on Tuesday, November 18th at 8 a.m. Pacific time. It'll take around 3 hours for it to get onto the app. And on Magic the Gathering Online, it's going to be released on the same, Tuesday, November 18th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So those are the timelines we're looking at. It's going to be released in roughly 6 days, a little over 5 days as of the recording of this video. And just so you know, because my videos do get uploaded every other day, you will see this video being uploaded at some point into like either 13th or 14th. So there is a little bit of leeway there. The archetypes have largely not changed. Aggro still consists of about a third of the format, with control being more predominant. You're seeing blue decks, that is Dimir and Esper Luris decks, seeing a lot of play. And combo decks such as Paradoxical Outcome and Dredge still showing a strong presence, over a fourth of the metagame. So let's go ahead and move forward here. Oops. Hold on a second. Okay. All right, so as far as the Legacy ban list, I want to address something about this. Legacy has made some very significant changes to its metagame over the last few years. I want to say ever since really Ragavan got printed in Modern Horizons 2, things just started getting, more and more progressively difficult for people to keep up with Legacy. For example, Ragavan got printed and then eventually got banned from the format. You saw Modern Horizons 3 come out, and cards, had a very, vast shift in the format where, Reanimator largely was always a good strong deck in Legacy. However, I want to address the fact that, Psychic Frog was a big part of it. You had cards like Entomb, which are now banned from the format. That's pretty significant. Cards like Nadu were largely, a very big part of Modern before it got banned, a very big part of probably EDH or competitive EDH. And then it got banned in that format as well. And of course, we're going to be seeing Nadu still legal in Vintage, of course, because it doesn't really get played a lot in Vintage. You're seeing mostly shops and, aggro decks such as Mono White Initiative being played in Vintage. You're seeing decks like Dredge being played as combo decks in Vintage. So not really a lot of room for a deck like Nadu to get played in Vintage. Certainly you could see somebody try to play Nadu in Vintage, and they may win some games and do really well, or they may not do well at all because the format is just that powerful. But I want to address the fact that people are shifting from Legacy. There's a shift in the paradigm, that is how we perceive Legacy as a format. And a lot of the people who play Legacy own dual lands, expensive cards such as dual lands, reserve list cards such as, I guess, what are some examples of of reserve list cards? I guess the dual lands, right? But even cards like Force of Will, which are not on the reserve list, they are cards that see play in Legacy that also bleed into Vintage. So what am I suggesting here? Well, are people going to shift from Legacy to Vintage? I'm not saying that's going to happen, but certainly on Magic the Gathering Online, there is the affordability and the, I want to say, resources to make that easy transition from Legacy to Vintage. And Vintage is a format where I was certainly excited to play and even motivated to play because I got a deck on Magic the Gathering MTGtop8.com, and that was a pretty big accomplishment for myself, as you may have seen in a previous video. The format largely is, I want to say, healthy because there haven't been any changes to the ban list, and I don't foresee any changes to the Vintage ban list in the future. People were discussing Luris and how it might get rebanned, but as you might have noticed from the ban list announcement, there have been a lot of different archetypes with Lurrus, and Lurrus largely represents blue decks. The decks that see play that are Lurrus decks play cards like Force of Will. Probably you'll see a lot of Psychic Frog. Cards that are blue that get pitched to Force of Will, those are the types of themes that we might see in decks of Lurrus. But more importantly, there are very different varieties and different flavors of Lurrus decks, such that I don't really see Lurrus being a problem card per se. It might just be one of those pillars of the format, such as Mishra's Workshop, Bazaar of Baghdad, and the like. Now, I want to talk about the goodness versus badness model. This is a model of playability that I myself have talked about in previous conversations with other people, but it's something that I want to bring up here today. Largely, cards being evaluated have an increased skeptibility of playability. People are just more skeptical of how good a card is. When you see cards in spoiler season, you might say, oh, this card is really good. Might not be very playable, but it's a really cool card. Cards being bad statistically is going to be correct most of the time. If you were to point out a card to me in a spoiler season and you were to say, yeah, this card isn't really that great, might not see a lot of play in Vintage, probably will see a lot of play in Standard, I mean, probably you'll be correct. Maybe even Standard might be pushing it. Certainly in Limited, if a card is good, for example, a high power toughness for mana value ratio, then you could make the argument that that might see play in Limited, because Limited is a format that focuses on creatures, creature removal, combat tricks, things like that. So why does this matter? Because a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video, as well as in future videos about whether a card is playable, decisions that I make regarding card choices index, is going to largely reflect on the fact that most cards in Magic are bad, and the cards that are playable, even though there's a large amount of cards in the card pool that is Vintage, there's actually a tiny segment of that pool, maybe even a slither, just like a little line. You could draw a small point in line, or line in the sand of Vintage playable cards, or cards that are legal in Vintage, and say that's the amount of cards that will actually see play in Vintage. Is a small speck of dust compared to the large amount of Magic the Gathering cards in general. So I want to talk about these characteristics, and I do apologize, I guess the S at the end bled off into the next line here, but general characteristics of good cards. These are just small, general guidelines. I'm not saying that every card fits this narrative, but these are some general things that you might want to look at for whether a card gets playable in formats like Vintage, Legacy, even Modern. You want to look at the mana value. So if it's cheap, generally speaking, it's going to be probably, I'm not saying it's going to be playable, but most of the cards that are playable tend to be cheap, low mana value cards. Perfect example of this is Orcish Bowmasters. It is a card that sees play in Vintage, Legacy, sees play everywhere. It's only 2 mana. Cards that are easy to cast, well, let's take Orcish Bowmasters again. It is easy to cast. It has a splashable mana value where it's got one colorless mana, or not one colorless mana, but one generic mana and one black mana. So you can, as long as you have a black mana and one of any type of mana, you can use that to cast Orcish Bowmasters. It's also instant speed, which is a big factor, and it has a significant impact on the board state and or the hand. So cards like Orcish Bowmasters, they ping or they deal damage to anything on the board or to the player, and then it creates a token. Those are two big things that it does, and it can also affect the hand size, because people are going to be thinking second thinking them, giving a second thought to whether or not they should draw extra cards, right? And cards like Psychic Frog are pitchable to Force of Will. They are blue cards. Most cards that are blue, they're going to be pitchable to Force of Will, but a lot of the cards you're seeing in the playability factor of Vintage, a lot of them are blue, right? Lands, you have to be generalizable here, right? Urza's Saga is a good example of a land that is I say generalizable because it is colorless. It can be played in pretty much any color deck, and it has a lasting impact again on the board state. So that is where we are as far as the characteristics of good cards. That fits the narrative of, again, the goodness versus badness model. I want to point a few things here. These are a couple of cards that I think are interesting. The first one is Redirect Lightning. This is a 1 red mana card, so it is cheap. It is relatively easy to cast. You might have an additional cost of paying 5 life or paying an extra 2 colorless mana, but the cost of paying 5 life, as you know, life is a resource, may not be that big of a deal. And the effect is that you change the target spell or ability with a single target. So this does effectively a redirect of a spell, and for only 1 mana, which is actually pretty powerful. It is also instant speed, which of course it needs to be in order to have that effect. And it is a lesson, which may or may not be relevant as far as, you know, whether or not that's going to matter in the setting of Vintage, but it is nevertheless a card that is cheap and pretty castable if you are playing red. Another card that I want to bring up is Tong, Librarian. This is a 2 mana card that has an X spell, so it could be more than X, or could be more than 2 mana, which makes it splashable, playable for late game, and it's got a lot of text in it, right? So it's got Flash, which means you can play it at instant speed. That's already a very strong effect. Vigilance and Flying are very powerful, I want to say, keywords that creatures might have that make them very powerful in the combat phase. When it enters the battlefield, you put X counters on it so it can grow late game. It can draw half of the X cards rounded down, which means it's card advantage. And more importantly, it has this effect, which is very similar to Archivist of Ogma's effect, which is whenever an opponent searches their library, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. So instead of gaining life, you know, you draw a card and you put a counter on it. This is a very strong card, and I know for a fact that in the cEDH community, or competitive commander community, people have been talking about this card. People have been saying, you know, this pitches the force of will. That already makes it a very strong card. But also, you know, it's only 2 mana. It can be more if you want it to be. Or, you know, if you want to just cast it for 2 mana at flash speed, certainly you can do that as well. So that is an example of a card that I think may possibly see some play in Vintage. I'm not saying it will. Again, 2 specifically blue mana might be a hard ask for some decks, but it is certainly something to think about. I don't know if Redirect Lightning is going to see play in Vintage. Again, it's very hard to predict the viability of a card preseason, but of course, when you look at some more data as tournaments and leagues go into the, you know, the coming days, you will start to get a picture of, you know, whether a card is going to be playable or not. And of course, I want to talk about briefly the mechanics of this set. You've got bending, like water bending, air bending, earth bending. You know, these are some mechanics that I don't really see them being too relevant. Lessons return from when they were previously. I think Strixhaven was the last time that we saw them, or maybe one of the first times we saw them. You have cards that are powerful, but again, they're at sorcery speed, so that's something to keep in mind. Sorcery speed cards tend not to do too well in Vintage, except for things like Demonic Tutor or Time Walk, which are just completely busted. So I want to talk again about your desirability for a card to be good versus the realistic effect of how that card may impact the format. We all want cards to be good. Don't get me wrong. I do like seeing cards that are innovative, that have surprisingly cool effects. But realistically, I think that at most 1 or 2 playable cards might be played in Vintage, if any at all. I mean, it's very likely that, again, the format might not change, just like it didn't with Spider-Man. And so the takeaways of this presentation are that we should remain largely positive that, you know, Avatar seems like a cool set. It'll be fun to draft. It'll be fun to play in Standard, maybe even Modern, but we do have to be careful about saying, oh, all these cards are going to be game changers in Vintage, right? Because at the end of the day, Vintage is an eternal format. It's not going to really budge, and Avatar's not really going to budge the needle, so to speak. That being said, if you already have a deck such as Mono White Initiative or, you know, Workshops, your deck is likely going to be safe from any ban or any shift. I think that Vintage is a very fun format, and I really think that people should be trying it out more because there's a lot of different flavors of Magic the Gathering, and the reason why I enjoy playing Vintage is because it represents a lot of power level cards. Cards like Mox Sapphire, cards like Force of Will, cards like Strip Mine that are just incredibly powerful, incredibly fun to play with. You see a lot of this in Timeless, but I think Timeless in Magic Arena is just not as interesting as a variety of decks that you see in Vintage, just because Vintage is just a lot more fun. It's been in the ecosystem of Magic the Gathering for forever, and I really hope you take it to heart what I've talked about in this presentation. If you enjoy any of my content, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I upload videos daily, and take it easy. I will see you all in the next video. Bye.